Have you ever wondered why sometimes we pray and don't get an immediate answer? It's a question many of us have asked at some point in our lives. We seek God in times of need, and when the answer doesn't come right away, it's easy to feel discouraged. But what if I told you that the delay is not a sign that God hasn't heard you, but rather a call for a deeper kind of faith? Faith is the foundation of our relationship with God. It's more than just believing in His existence or acknowledging His power. True faith is standing firm in our trust in Him, even when we can't see the outcome. It's about believing in His goodness and His timing, even when the world around us feels uncertain or overwhelming. Faith is not passive, it's active. It's a daily decision to surrender our worries, our fears, and our need for control into God's hands. Think about it. How often do we try to take matters into our own hands because we're impatient? We want immediate results, immediate answers, and we forget that God operates outside of time. His ways are higher than ours, His plans far beyond what we can comprehend. And sometimes, God's silence is not a no, but a wait. He asks us to trust Him, even when we don't understand what He's doing. In Proverbs 3:5-6, the Bible tells us to trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight. It's a reminder that our understanding is limited, but God sees the bigger picture. Imagine a situation in your life where you were desperately seeking an answer and nothing seemed to happen. Maybe you prayed for a breakthrough, for healing, for guidance, but all you heard was silence. It's in these moments that our faith is tested the most. It's easy to trust God when everything is going well, but true faith is refined in the waiting. Waiting requires patience, and patience requires trust. God's timing is always perfect. He sees things we cannot, and He knows the right moment to bring about His will. Psalm 27:14 encourages us to wait for the Lord. Be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord. It's in the waiting that we grow closer to Him, learning to depend on Him fully. Faith is not just about getting what we want. It's about trusting that what God has planned is far better than anything we could imagine. It's about letting go of our desire for control and allowing God to work in His way and in His time. When we do this, we not only grow in faith, but we also experience the peace that comes from knowing God is in control. Philippians 4:7 speaks of a peace that surpasses all understanding, a peace that guards our hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. This peace comes when we surrender our worries and trust in God's perfect plan. So today, I encourage you to hold on to your faith. Don't be discouraged by the silence, and don't be swayed by the uncertainty. God hears you, He sees you, and He is working all things together for your good. It may not happen in your time, but it will happen in God's time. And when it does, you will see that His plan was greater than anything you could have ever hoped for. Because of your faith, God will answer you. The power of God is beyond anything we can comprehend. As it says in Job 26:7, He stretches out the north over the void and hangs the earth on nothing. This verse reminds us of the majesty and sheer power of God. He created the universe, from the smallest atom to the vastness of space, and He controls it all. Ecclesiastes 3:1 further illustrates that there is a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens. This means that everything that happens is part of God's plan, and nothing is outside His control. However, we, as human beings, often forget this. We try to take matters into our own hands, believing that we can manage everything ourselves. But the truth is, we are limited. Our understanding, our strength, our wisdom, all are finite. Yet we continue to struggle, attempting to hold on to the illusion of control. But there comes a point when we must acknowledge that some things are simply beyond our ability to manage. Take the story of Jehoshaphat in 2 Chronicles 20. Jehoshaphat was the king of Judah, and he faced a terrifying situation. A vast army was coming to attack his kingdom, and he knew that his forces were no match for them. In this moment of crisis, Jehoshaphat could have panicked. He could have tried to come up with a strategy to fight the overwhelming enemy. But instead, he chose to turn to God. He gathered the people of Judah, and they fasted and prayed. In his prayer, Jehoshaphat said, "We do not know what to do, but our eyes are on you." 2 Chronicles 20:12. This was an act of surrender. Jehoshaphat admitted that he did not have the power to control the situation. He acknowledged that only God could save them, and he placed his trust in God's hands. What happened next was nothing short of miraculous. God spoke through a prophet and told Jehoshaphat that the battle was not his to fight, but God's. All Jehoshaphat and his people needed to do was to stand firm in their faith and watch God work. The next day, as they went out to face the enemy, they didn't fight. Instead, they sang praises to God, and as they did, God caused confusion in the enemy camp, and they turned on each other. Jehoshaphat and his people didn't have to lift a finger. They won the battle because they surrendered control to God and trusted in his power. The story of Jehoshaphat teaches us an important lesson about faith and surrender. We often face situations that are beyond our control, whether it's a financial crisis, a health issue, or a relationship problem. In these moments, we can either try to handle everything ourselves, which usually leads to stress, anxiety, and frustration, or we can do what Jehoshaphat did: surrender it all to God. When we surrender to God, we acknowledge that we are not in control, but He is. And when we let go of our need to control everything, we make room for God to work in our lives. Similarly, we can look at the story of Hezekiah in 2 Kings 20. Hezekiah was a king who was known for his faithfulness to God, but he faced a dire situation. He became gravely ill, and the prophet Isaiah came to him with a devastating message. "Put your house in order, because you are going to die. You will not recover." 2 Kings 21. In that moment, Hezekiah could have accepted his fate and given up. But instead, he turned to God in prayer. He cried out to the Lord, reminding God of his faithfulness and pleading for more time. And God heard his prayer. Before Isaiah had even left the palace, God spoke to him again and told him to return to Hezekiah with a new message. God had heard Hezekiah's prayer and seen his tears, and he would add 15 more years to his life. Not only that, but God also promised to deliver Hezekiah and his city from their enemies. Hezekiah's story is a powerful example of how prayer and surrender can lead to miracles. When we face situations that seem hopeless, like Hezekiah did, we have a choice. We can either accept defeat, or we can turn to God and trust in His power. When we surrender to God, we are not giving up. We are placing our lives in the hands of the one who is all-powerful, all-knowing, and infinitely loving. God's power is limitless, and when we surrender to Him, we open the door for Him to do what we cannot. It is not easy to surrender control, especially in a world that values self-reliance and independence. We are taught from a young age that we must be strong, that we must be in control of our lives. But the truth is, there are many things in life that are beyond our control. We cannot control the actions of others. We cannot control the future. We cannot even control the next breath we take. But God can. He holds all things in His hands, and when we trust Him, we find peace. Philippians 4:7 tells us that the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. This peace is not the absence of problems, but the presence of God in the midst of them. When we surrender our worries and fears to God, we are no longer weighed down by the burden of trying to control everything. We are free to trust that God is in control and that He will work all things together for our good. Romans 8:28. It's important to remember that surrendering to God doesn't mean we sit back and do nothing. Surrender is an active choice to trust God and follow His lead. It means praying, seeking His will, and being obedient to His word. It means letting go of our need to control the outcome and trusting that God's plan is better than ours. Surrendering to God also means being patient. God's timing is not our timing, and sometimes we have to wait for His answer. But in the waiting, we can find peace, knowing that God is working behind the scenes. Isaiah 40:31 says, "But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint." Waiting on God is not wasted time. It is a time of growth, a time of strengthening our faith, and a time of preparing for what God has in store for us. In the stories of Jehoshaphat and Hezekiah, we see two men who faced overwhelming circumstances. Both of them chose to surrender their situations to God, and both of them experienced God's miraculous power. But their stories are not unique. The Bible is filled with examples of people who surrendered to God and saw His power at work in their lives. From Moses leading the Israelites out of Egypt, to Daniel in the lion's den, to the Apostle Paul enduring persecution for the sake of the gospel, each of them surrendered control to God and trusted in His power. And it's not just in the Bible that we see the power of surrender. Even today, countless people have experienced God's power in their lives when they chose to let go and let God take control. Maybe you've heard stories of someone who prayed for a financial breakthrough, and just when they were about to give up, God provided in a miraculous way. Or perhaps you know someone who was facing a serious illness, but after praying and trusting in God, they experienced healing. These stories remind us that God is still at work today, and He still responds to our faith and surrender. When we surrender to God, we are saying, "God, I trust You more than I trust myself. I believe that Your plan is better than mine, and I am willing to follow where You lead." This kind of faith is not easy, but it is powerful. It allows us to experience the peace that comes from knowing that we are not in control, but the one who loves us the most is. So, what is it in your life that you need to surrender to God? Is it a relationship, a job, a financial situation, or a health issue? Whatever it is, know that God is waiting for you to hand it over to Him. He is ready to take the burden off your shoulders and give you peace in exchange. All you have to do is trust Him, surrender it to God, and watch as He works in ways you never thought possible. In conclusion, the power of God is beyond anything we can comprehend. He is the creator of the universe, and He is in control of all things. When we face situations that are beyond our control, we have a choice. We can either try to handle everything ourselves, or we can surrender it to God. The stories of Jehoshaphat and Hezekiah remind us that when we surrender to God, we experience His power in miraculous ways. And when we let go of our need to control everything, we find peace, a peace that transcends all understanding. So today, I encourage you to surrender your worries, your fears, and your struggles to God. Trust in His power and watch as He works in your life. Faith is not just something we talk about, it's something we live. I remember a time in my life when I was confronted with a situation that truly tested my faith. It was one of those moments where nothing seemed to go right, and I felt like I had done everything in my power to make things work, but the outcome remained out of my hands. I was in a season of uncertainty, waiting for an answer to a prayer that seemed to go unanswered for so long. Every day I prayed, asking God for guidance, for clarity, and for a breakthrough, but it felt like nothing was changing. My frustration grew as I wondered why God wasn't responding. Had I done something wrong? Was my faith not strong enough? It was during this time that I realized something profound. Faith is not about getting what we want when we want it. It's about trusting in God's plan, even when we don't understand it. I came to understand that my season of waiting was not a punishment or a sign of failure. Instead, it was a period of growth. It was a time where God was teaching me to rely on Him completely, to surrender my need for control, and to trust that His timing is perfect. Waiting on God requires patience, and patience is one of the most challenging virtues to develop. In today's world, we are conditioned to expect instant results. We live in a society where everything moves fast. Fast food, fast internet, fast solutions. We've grown accustomed to having our needs met almost immediately. But faith doesn't work that way. God doesn't operate on our timetable. He knows what we need before we even ask, and He knows the best time to provide it. My experience taught me that sometimes the delay in God's response is not a denial, but a preparation. He is preparing us for something greater, something beyond what we can see in the moment. I remember feeling a sense of peace wash over me when I finally surrendered my situation to God. I stopped trying to control the outcome and allowed God to take over. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. And in that surrender, I found a strength I didn't know I had. Philippians 4:6-7 reminds us, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." That peace became real for me when I let go of my need to understand every detail and trusted that God was working in ways I couldn't see. Faith is not passive. It's an active decision to trust God every single day, especially in the moments when it feels hardest to do so. In today's world where we are constantly bombarded with pressures and uncertainties, holding on to faith can feel like a battle. We are faced with challenges that seem insurmountable: financial struggles, health crises, broken relationships. And it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking we need to fix everything ourselves. But the truth is, we can't. We are limited, but God is limitless. When we put our trust in Him, we allow Him to work on our behalf. And the most beautiful part of faith is that it brings peace, even when the situation doesn't immediately change. The peace comes from knowing that we are not alone, that the Creator of the universe is with us, guiding us and sustaining us through every trial. I've also seen faith in action in the lives of others. I know a friend who went through an incredibly difficult time when her business was on the verge of collapse. She had invested everything into this business, and when the market shifted, she found herself facing bankruptcy. She prayed daily, asking God for a solution, but things only seemed to get worse. There were days when she felt like giving up, but in her darkest moments, she held on to her faith. She continued to pray, to believe that God had a plan for her, even though she couldn't see it. And then, just when she thought all hope was lost, an opportunity came that changed everything. It wasn't what she had expected, and it wasn't how she thought things would work out. But God opened a door she hadn't even considered. Her business took a new direction, and today it is more successful than she ever imagined. She often says that if it weren't for her faith and her willingness to trust in God's timing, she would have missed out on the blessing He had for her. Stories like this remind me that faith is not about the absence of challenges, but about trusting God through them. It's about believing that He is in control, even when everything around us feels chaotic. In Isaiah 55, 8 through 9, God says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." This verse is a reminder that God's perspective is so much greater than ours. He sees the whole picture, while we only see a small part. What may seem like a delay or a setback to us is often part of God's greater plan. So how does faith act in our modern lives? In a world that demands instant gratification, faith teaches us to wait. It teaches us to trust that God is working, even when we can't see the evidence. It teaches us that true strength comes from surrendering our plans to God and allowing Him to lead us. Faith doesn't mean that everything will go smoothly or that we won't face hardship, but it does mean that we will have the strength to endure whatever comes our way because we know that God is with us. Faith gives us the courage to keep going, even when we don't know what the outcome will be. As you reflect on your own life, I encourage you to think about the areas where you are struggling to let go of control. What are you holding on to that you need to surrender to God? Maybe it's a job situation, a relationship, or a personal challenge that feels overwhelming. Take a moment to pause and pray. Ask God to give you the strength to trust Him fully, to surrender your worries, and to have faith in His perfect plan. As you pray, remember that God is always listening. He knows your heart, and He is working behind the scenes in ways you may not even realize. Faith is a journey. It's something we build day by day, moment by moment. And as we continue to trust in God, we will see His hand at work in our lives. We may not always understand why things happen the way they do, but we can rest in the assurance that God is in control. He loves us, He cares for us, and He will never abandon us. So today, I invite you to take that step of faith. Trust in God, surrender your worries to Him, and watch as He moves in your life in ways you never expected. Faith is the key that unlocks the miracles of God. Throughout history and in our own lives, faith has shown itself as the foundation upon which God works wonders. When we choose to trust Him, even in the most difficult moments, we allow Him to demonstrate His power in ways that go beyond our understanding. The Bible reminds us repeatedly that nothing is impossible with God. Luke 1:37. It's through faith that mountains are moved, storms are calmed, and lives are transformed. Whether we face personal struggles or feel overwhelmed by life's uncertainties, it is faith that anchors us to the truth that God hears our prayers and is always working on our behalf. Even in moments of silence, when we feel like God is distant, we must hold fast to the promise that He is near and that His timing is perfect. It's in these moments that our faith is tested and strengthened. I encourage you today to reflect on the power of faith in your own life. Think about the times when you've faced challenges and how your faith sustained you. It may not have always been easy, but faith has a way of giving us strength when we have none. And remember, God is faithful. He never fails. No matter what you're going through right now, hold on to your faith because God is listening and He is already working things out for your good. As we come to the close of this message, I want to invite you to join me in prayer. Let's take this moment to surrender our worries, our fears, and our burdens to God. Let's choose faith over fear, trusting that God has everything under control. If you're watching this video, I encourage you to pause and pray with me now. Together, let's declare that we will place our faith in God's hands, knowing that He can do the impossible in our lives. After the prayer, I would love to hear from you. Please share your personal stories in the comments below. How has faith shaped your journey? Have you experienced a moment where you had to rely completely on God and He came through for you in a miraculous way? Sharing your story not only encourages others, but reminds us all of the power of faith in action. And if this message has touched your heart, I invite you to share this video with your friends and family. By doing so, you're helping spread hope and inspiration to others who might be struggling and in need of encouragement. Let's continue to build a community of faith, lifting each other up and reminding one another that with God, all things are possible. Thank you for watching, and may God bless you abundantly as you continue to walk in faith.